name is Barb Quaintance, and I am a VP at AARP, and it's my great pleasure to be responsible for the AARP Purpose Prize. Thank you to Ideagen for having us and being such a terrific supporter of the Purpose Prize. Let me just tell you 2 minutes about it, 1 minute really. The Purpose Prize is the only national award that celebrates 50 plus founders of nonprofit organizations. These are people who saw a problem, went after it, used their skills and their lived experience to use innovative solutions to problems that they see in their community or even around the world. We have 5 Purpose Prize winners every year. They receive $50,000 from AARP plus a year of support for their organizations, such as board relations, leadership coaching, data analysis, etc. It's our goal at AARP to not just celebrate the individuals who win the Purpose Prize, but also to help strengthen their organizations for lasting impact. I am delighted today to introduce you to Sharron Rush, who is one of this year's Purpose Prize winners. Sharron is the CEO and founder of Knowbility. And I'm not going to try to tell you what it does because you have the expert here to hear all about it. So Sharron, thanks for joining us today. It's so nice to see you.
Oh, again. Thank you, Barb. Thanks for having me. Thanks for this great experience of being part of the Purpose Prize community.
Well, first of all, tell us about Knowbility. What is its mission? What is the work that you do?
Knowbility is, and I should note that the spelling of our name sometimes confuses people. It's Knowbility, Knowbility, and we were founded to address the problem of digital equity, the equal access to technology for people with disabilities. And those are people with disabilities of all kinds, people who are blind, deaf, mobility impaired, who may have cognitive or emotional disabilities. And the idea is that as our modern world uses technology so much more widely and deeply and for very basic life functions, that people with disabilities should have equal access to those opportunities. So that's our work.
I will tell you that I thought I was pretty good on this issue until Sharron enlightened me about some of the ways that AARP can do better around technology accessibility, which we really appreciate. Sharron, tell me about you. What drew you to this work specifically?
Well, it was an interesting path because I honestly didn't anticipate. I didn't anticipate that I would be founding an organization. I was working for an organization that served people with disabilities, Easter Seals in Central Texas. And I'm in Austin. It was the late 90s. And of course, technology was really transforming my town, my city. The startup community was very active. People were starting technology businesses. IBM was here. A lot of activity around technology. And my job at Easter Seals was to find employment for people with disabilities. And as more and more technology companies came in, I, of course, turned to these new employers in the town and started expecting I would find opportunities for my stakeholders and my constituents. Well, it didn't turn out to be that way. And it was because of the barriers in the way the technology was designed. So people with disabilities could not be hired for technology jobs in many cases because the technology itself was not accessible to them, and the screen reading or other assistive technologies that they used to access the web and electronic communications. So that barrier to me didn't make any sense. I had some background in technology. I had an associate's degree in computer science from when I was very young. And I knew that technology did not have to have those barriers. They weren't necessary, but that the people who were making the technology probably were simply unaware of the fact that those barriers had been built into the way the technology was designed. So we started an awareness campaign, and I was at Easter Seals. I went around town, talked to other entrepreneurs, other nonprofits who advocated for people with disabilities, to the city of Austin and their digital divide initiatives, and just really sort of made the rounds talking about it. And we started this collaborative effort where we were appealing to the tech sector to learn about accessibility. And then to act on what they learned by creating accessible websites and applications for nonprofit organizations. It was very fun. It was a hackathon, I guess, but at that time there wasn't the word hackathon. So it was a really great collaboration for a couple of years. And then Easter Seals got a new CEO who said, "Wait a minute, this isn't what Easter Seals does. We're a rehabilitation organization. We don't mess with this technology." And so she wanted to shut the program down, but by that time we had quite a bit of interest and momentum from both the tech sector and the nonprofit community. And so it was startup culture in Austin, and a number of people who were involved in the collaboration said, "Well, Sharron, let's just start our own nonprofit and let's keep this thing going." And so we did. So it was kind of an accidental, happy accident, but it wasn't like I set out to start a new organization. I just had to continue to address this problem.
So I think that makes you a social entrepreneur. That's a fancy title, but that's exactly what you did. You were entrepreneurial. Um, Sharron, I've heard you talk about this as a civil rights issue. Can you just say a word or two about that?
Well, when you talk about equity for a group of people, for a marginalized group of people, it does, and maybe that's my upbringing too. The fact that I came of age, I was a teenager during the 60s and 70s and the civil rights movements and women's liberation movements, and the idea that people who have been traditionally left out of opportunities have rights and should be included. And I've come to see this need for digital equity and digital inclusion very much as a civil rights issue. And, Barb, if you think about, I mean, I've always felt like that since we started Knowbility. But I think if there was a silver lining to the global pandemic, it was the fact that this issue became really undeniable, because when you're asking people or expecting people to do their grocery shopping, their go to work, go to school, engage in social and civic activities, all of those remotely from home using technology, you can no longer say that, "Oh, well, people with disabilities, we'll get around to that one of these days. We'll think about that later as we build out our technology." It becomes a right. And even the United Nations, the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, there is a section in there about digital inclusion and the right that people have to equal opportunity to online information, exchange, interaction.
Yeah. Sharon knows I have a child with multiple disabilities and he is nonverbal. And so he uses an iPad to communicate basically. And I realized, Sharon, that I had just sort of let go of the thought that he would be able to use the web um, in any meaningful way because it just wasn't accessible. So you have changed my view of the world, and I appreciate that. Tell us about how you measure success at Knowbility. Is it the number of websites you interact with? Is it training sessions? Tell us a little more about that.
It measuring success is kind of tricky for us, because when you're talking about we make the web more accessible, well, that has impact on tens of millions of people. They're estimated there are a billion or more people in the world who have disabilities, some of them temporary, some of them permanent. People acquire disabilities. So that kind of access, we feel, has this global impact on the lives of millions and millions of people. But because you're addressing the root cause, you can't I can't claim Knowbility has changed the way the world works, even though that is our goal. But that is ultimately how we look at success. Is the web becoming more accessible? Are people more able to interact, to use the web? But we have to report to funders and to our community. We do talk about, we've done this many trainings, this many people have attended Access U, which is our annual training conference. We have this many people with disabilities who've been trained and are now placed in jobs. Students with disabilities that we've helped, maybe by empowering their teachers to use technology more effectively in the classroom. So we do try to track those kinds of numbers, but ultimately we think that our success will be measured when this is no longer an issue and that technology is designed accessibly from the start in the way that the built environment is now. You can't become an architect if you don't understand about wheelchair ramps and elevators and the width of doors for wheelchairs. And that's kind of where we're headed, what we're hoping for in our work, that it becomes integrated into the way technology is designed and thought about. And we're a long way from there still.
Let's step back even just a second, if we could. I imagine people who are listening to this are thinking, okay, I get like closed captioning. That makes sense to me, or, captioning in a particular way. Just give us two or three other, help us broaden our thinking.
Sure. Yes.
Other ways to make the web more accessible.
Well, I think one of the easiest things to understand is the way that blind people interact with the internet. And that's maybe not the largest group of people with disabilities, but it's easy for people to understand that if you can't see, you might have trouble navigating a screen. And so the screen reading technology is called one of many kinds of assistive technologies. And there are coding techniques that allow a screen reader to understand the structure of the page. If you are sighted and you look at a web page and you see the big headings, then these are sections and you can kind of browse through them. You can do the same thing in the code so that assistive technology has access to that same structure. People who are blind can't use a mouse. You can't point and click. So you have to have another way to move the focus of the page to those clickable elements. So if you've got buttons or links, you have to make those accessible and operable from the keyboard. So you need to be able to use the tab key or the arrow keys to be able to move around the page. That's not always the case. And the languages of the web, the basic language, HTML, is pretty inherently accessible when it's used in the proper semantic structure that it was designed for. But technology people love shortcuts, and they tend to design for themselves, thinking, oh, this is slick, this is cool, I'm going to do these things, I'm going to use this JavaScripted interactive language, and then they don't always bring over the accessibility features that are built into the language. So there's a group at the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, that focuses on accessibility. It's called the Web Accessibility Initiative. They build standards that tell designers how do you make your applications accessible. And their principles are that content has to be perceivable, whether you can see or hear or not. It's perceivable however you perceive things. You might use a braille display. So there are another assistive technology is this refreshable braille, where the screen reading technology goes through and it changes the text to dots on a little output device that people can feel with their fingertips. So perceivable, operable. I have to be able to operate it even if I can't use a mouse, if through different kinds of techniques. And think about mobile phones, how you use those like what are the screen
Like when you're swiping on a screen?
swipe.
Yeah,
Swipe
yeah.
is the word I want. Yes, the swipe, the two-finger swipe. And there are those kinds of signals where you can operate it in different ways. Perceivable, operable, understandable. Plain language is really important. And robust. In other words, that the content that's there can be discovered, used, and understood on different kinds of devices, because people with disabilities may use different than the typical user of the mouse and the screen.
So it sounds like the technology pretty much exists to do this. It's a matter of actually doing it or being aware that this is a necessary component of whatever that might be. Can you give, is that fair? Is that a fair characterization?
That's exactly right. The technology is absolutely there to create accessible interfaces and make information accessible for people with disabilities. It's a matter of awareness and I think requirements too.
Yeah, requirements. That's important. Can you give us an example or two of what you consider some successes that you've had via the trainings or the Access You, whatever, where you sort of turn a light bulb for people and it really made a difference in their work?
Sure. I love to talk about that. We are by nature, I think because we started as a collaboration, we are by nature collaborative. So we share information widely and freely. I mentioned our Access U conference every year. We bring people together, both as teachers and learners, to share best practices and ideas for accessible design. Um, every year we've had more and more people attend. During the global pandemic, I think we were the first to do we did the entire conference completely as a remote experience with all the keynotes, the social events, the classes, everything was live streamed and available, captioned, audio described when that was necessary. So so those I think that was a big success for us that we were able to do that. It's an important part of building the community. I think another success that Knowbility has is that sense of community. There are many more commercially driven accessibility consultancies these days for a lot of reasons. I think the global pandemic, as I mentioned, raised awareness, and people thought, oh, well, I can use this expertise and make money on it. And it's a viable business opportunity. Well, in every single one of those companies that if you go looking around, Knowbility has contributed to the roots. Like we have people in leadership positions who came through either the AIR program or Access U at Google, at Apple, Level Access, DQ, all these large companies that are known for their accessibility initiatives. We have contributed expertise and, in many cases, people with disabilities who now work at those organizations. We have a summer internship program that's been very successful through the Texas School for the Blind. We have really empowered several students to choose careers in technology because we encourage them to believe that it's possible and also how to advocate for themselves within a company setting, that I need tools that are accessible if I'm going to communicate with my peers. Those kinds of requirements for employment, I think, are something that we are really helpful to people with disabilities to help them self-advocate. Um, I'll tell you one story that I is pretty dear to me. We had a person, a blind woman, she mother of three kids, homeschooling her kids, trying to use the internet to homeschool her kids. She volunteered at Knowbility, even with all she had going on, because she loved the mission and she knew how important it was. And after a couple of years of working with us, we introduced her to a global online publisher, and she now works full time her kids are older, and she works full time as an accessibility expert for a global publishing company. And we have several stories like that of people who have worked with us as volunteers or as program participants and then go on to careers in accessible technology at major tech or publishing or retail companies. And that's really very satisfying.
You have to feel good at the end of the day when you have a story like that to tell. That's fantastic. Sharron, I want to use the last couple of minutes we have to turn away from Knowbility per se. And as you say, you were an accidental founder of Innovation. If there are people out there thinking, this particular issue or problem is really important to me and I don't see it addressed in my community and I want to start my own organization, what advice would you give them? Or what are the must-dos or maybe a couple of please do not do's that you would offer?
Well, I would really advise people not to think or try to do it alone. You have to have you have to have community support. I mean, as I mentioned, I was really encouraged to do this because I wasn't alone in seeing the need, and I had a good set of board members and supporters to help get started. And also, I'd say that you should have such belief in your ability to address this problem that you don't get weary of it, that it's important enough to you that you would stay with it for a while. Because I see often, and I've been reading a lot lately about the burnout in the nonprofit community because the problems can seem so large and so overwhelming that after a while you just get tired. And I think you have to be ready to the fact that this is going to be a long-term commitment. You have to really understand that and be sure that you are emotionally prepared for that. Honestly, I didn't think that we would still be talking about accessible technology design 22 years later. I thought this would, once we raised awareness in the tech sector, that they would start building things accessibly, but it hasn't turned out to be true. So I think you have to know that as much as you think this is a solvable problem, it may take a while, and you should have that long-term commitment.
That is really good advice. Whenever people ask me, what do the Purpose Prize winners have in common? The first word that comes to my mind is tenacity, right? These are not small problems that you've attacked, and they don't get solved overnight. So, Sharron,
is tenacity a nice word for stubbornness?
I take either one, So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for telling us about this really important work. And I just couldn't be more proud to be in conversation with you. So thank you very much.
Oh, Barb, thank you. This has been just a phenomenal experience, and I'm so grateful to be part of this community. I've learned a tremendous amount from my compatriots and the folks that I've met through this process. So thank you.
Great. And thank you to Ideagen for letting us shine a spotlight on Sharron Rush and Knowbility. Thank you much.